There's a secret only the rejected know, a forced intimacy with the soul that no personal development course teaches, no guru shares in their motivational talks. Clarice Lispector discovered this in the most raw way possible. Being rejected is almost an encounter. Not an encounter with the other who rejects us, but an encounter with that part of us that has always existed in the shadows, waiting to be seen. When someone says no to us, when we are excluded, when our presence is unwanted, something much greater than our ego shatters. And it is precisely in this shattering that the sacred resides. Why does our brain process rejection as actual physical pain? Why does a word, a gesture of exclusion, hurt as much as a wound on the body? Neuroscience has discovered that the same brain areas that respond to physical pain activate when we are rejected. But perhaps this isn't an evolutionary bug. Perhaps it's a portal. Jung said that we only find our true nature when our persona is rejected. When the mask we construct to be accepted in the world shatters, our shadow is finally allowed to exist. And it is in this involuntary permission that we find something we've been searching for our entire lives without knowing it, our true encounter with ourselves. Welcome to a glimpse of the real. Today, we're going to delve into territory few have the courage to explore: how rejection can become the most sacred of spiritual initiations. If you're here, it's because you've already experienced that silence that comes after a no, that emptiness that sets in when we're discarded, ignored, or simply not chosen. And if you're like most people, you probably believe this pain needs to be overcome as quickly as possible, healed, and transformed into a motivating force. But what if I told you that our rush to get over rejection is exactly what keeps us stuck in the same cycle? That our attempt to quickly transform pain into learning is a sophisticated way of escaping what rejection really came to show us. Clarice Lispector lived her entire life feeling like a stranger in the world. I was a stranger in the world, she wrote, not as a lament, but as a discovery, as if she had finally found her true identity. Not the person who belongs, but the person who questions the very concept of belonging. There's a fundamental difference between rejection and spiritual abandonment. Human rejection pushes us away from others. Spiritual abandonment pushes us inward. And it's this distinction that determines whether an experience of no will destroy us or rebuild us in a completely new way. How many times have you preemptively rejected yourself? How many opportunities have you not sought? How many words have you not spoken? How many dreams have you not pursued because you already knew deep down that you would be rejected? There's a part of us that collects rejections as evidence of our unworthiness, as if each no were definitive proof that we don't deserve the yes our soul most desires. But there's something that needs to be revealed, something I only discovered by studying real-life cases of people who completely transformed their relationship with rejection. And this discovery will challenge everything you believe about approval, belonging, and what it means to be truly loved. The first lie we need to debunk is this: that rejection is always about us. That when someone says no to us, they're making a judgment about our worth, our dignity, our capacity to be loved. This is the most superficial and, at the same time, the most destructive interpretation we can make. The truth is much more complex and, paradoxically, much more liberating. When we are rejected, it is often not our essence that is being denied, but our persona. And there is a vast difference between these two things. Our persona is the social mask we construct to be accepted. It's the edited version of ourselves we present to the world, hoping for approval. When this persona is rejected, we feel as if our entire being is unwanted. But Jung teaches us that this can be the best thing that happens to us, because finally, our true nature has room to emerge. Think for a moment. How many times have you been rejected for trying to be someone you weren't? How many times was the no you received actually a divine redirection, preventing you from wasting your energy in places where your authenticity would never be valued? Clarice understood this viscerally. She wrote, "Maybe I shouldn't have met certain people," as if recognizing that not every connection is a gift. Sometimes rejection is protection. Sometimes not being chosen by someone who can't truly see us is the universe sparing us an even greater betrayal, the betrayal of ourselves. But here's the deeper paradox. Our culture teaches us to avoid rejection at all costs. We've developed sophisticated strategies of preemptive self-rejection. Better to reject ourselves first than to risk being rejected by others. And so we create a perfect prison. We are never truly chosen because we never allow ourselves to be truly seen. Neuroscience shows that when we anticipate rejection, our brains release cortisol, the stress hormone. We remain in a constant state of alert, as if stalked by an invisible predator. Our ability to connect authentically is compromised because we're constantly defending a fortress we're not even sure is worth protecting. And here comes the first transformative insight. The rejection we fear most is the one we've already inflicted on ourselves. We reject our inconvenient feelings, our inappropriate desires, our vulnerability. And then we become desperate for external approval to compensate for the internal approval we deny ourselves. If this has already started to make sense to you, if you can recognize this pattern in your own life, then you're ready for what comes next. Because now we're going to explore the deeper mechanism of rejection, how it works like a quantum mirror, reflecting exactly what we most need to see about ourselves. There's a practice that changed everything about my understanding of rejection, and I want to share it with you now. I call it archaeology of the rejected heart. It's a process of excavating the layers of rejection we carry, not to victimize ourselves, but to understand the unconscious patterns that govern our lives. First, we need to distinguish between a wound and a spiritual scar. An active wound is a rejection that still bleeds within us. It changes our posture, influences our decisions, and distorts our perception. A spiritual scar is a rejection that has been integrated, that has become wisdom, that no longer controls us. How can we tell the difference? An active wound generates reactivity. When someone rejects us in a way similar to a past, unhealed rejection, we react disproportionately. Our response is charged with emotions that belong to the past, not the present. A spiritual scar, on the other hand, generates compassion. We can see the other person's pain behind their need to reject us. I'll share with you a specific technique for taking an emotional inventory of active rejections. Over the next few days, write down every time you feel a tightness in your chest, a contraction in your stomach, or a feeling of diminishment when interacting with others. These are physical signs that an old rejection has been activated. Now, ask yourself this question: what aspect of me is being rejected in this interaction? Not what the person is doing, but what part of you is being denied. Maybe it's your need to be heard. Maybe it's your desire to matter. Maybe it's your vulnerability, your creativity, your spontaneity. Here we come to the most destructive mechanism of unhealed rejection: traumatic generalization. Our brain, trying to protect us from future pain, takes a specific experience of rejection and transforms it into a universal truth about our identity. If he rejected me, it's because I'm rejectable. If I wasn't chosen for that job, it's because I'm worthless. If my parents couldn't love me consistently, it's because I'm unlovable. Neuroscience shows us that this generalization occurs in the most primitive regions of the brain, those responsible for survival. For these ancient parts of us, Rejection by the group meant certain death. So, we developed a hypersensitive warning system that interprets any sign of potential rejection as an existential threat. Clarice Lispector transformed this feeling of not belonging into her greatest creative strength. "I was a stranger in the world," she repeated, but not as a lament, as if she had finally found her true home, not in the world of others, but in the inner world where her authenticity could flourish. When we're rejected, our brain releases a cascade of neurotransmitters that literally alter our internal chemistry. Dopamine, our reward neurotransmitter, plummets. That's why we feel so empty after rejection, as if all the color has drained from the world. But there's something more subtle going on. Rejection also blocks our natural production of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. We feel disconnected not only from the person who rejected us, but from all of humanity. It's as if a part of us is temporarily disconnected from the universal network of love. And herein lies the deeper irony. The more desperate we become for external approval, the more we produce cortisol, the stress hormone. And excess cortisol makes us less capable of authentic connection. We create a vicious cycle where our hunger for acceptance makes us less acceptable. There's a specific practice that can break this chemical cycle in just 3 minutes. When you feel the first signs of rejection, that tightness in your chest, that feeling of diminishment, do the following. Breathe deeply through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Exhale through your mouth for 6 counts. Repeat this 8 times. As you do this, mentally say, "This pain does not define who I am. This moment does not determine my worth. My essence remains untouched." This isn't just a relaxation technique. It's a way of communicating to your nervous system that you're not in real danger. That rejection, however painful, isn't a threat to your survival. And when your body understands this, your internal chemistry can rebalance. Now we come to the most transformative insight, the law of resonance applied to human relationships. According to quantum physics, we attract experiences that are in vibrational resonance with us. This doesn't mean we deserve to be rejected. It means that often the rejections we receive reflect aspects of ourselves that we reject. Let me tell you the true story of a woman who completely changed her experience with rejection when she understood this principle. Maria, 45, had been consistently rejected in romantic relationships. Men would leave her, saying she was too intense, too needy, too complicated. For years, she tried to change herself to be more acceptable. She suppressed her emotional intensity, pretended to need less, and hid her complexity. But the rejections continued, only now for different reasons. You're too cold, too distant, too superficial. That's when she did the emotional mirror exercise. She asked herself, what aspects of myself am I rejecting? The answer was devastating and liberating. She was rejecting her own intensity, her own need for deep connection, her own emotional complexity. What she discovered was revolutionary. The people around her were merely mirrors of her own self-rejection. When she began to embrace her intensity as a gift, her need for intimacy as sacred, her complexity as inner richness, something magical happened. She stopped attracting people who rejected her for who she was. She began attracting people who valued the very things she had learned to value in herself. Lao Tzu, the Taoist sage, teaches us something profound about emptiness. The usefulness of a vase lies in its empty space. What he's telling us is that sometimes what's missing is more important than what's present. Clarice Lispector understood this viscerally when she wrote about the silence that comes after rejection. There was a silence, as if the world had fallen silent to listen to me, as if the void left by the other's absence created a sacred space where our true voice could finally echo. How often do we interpret this silence as abandonment when in fact it is an invitation? An invitation to discover the company we keep for ourselves when all external voices fall silent. An invitation to listen to the whispers of our soul that remain inaudible amidst the noise of constant approval. There's a Zen story that always touches me deeply. A monk asks his master, "Master, what should I do when everyone rejects me?" The master smiles and replies, "Finally, you are free to discover who you truly are when you're not trying to be accepted by anyone." This is the most radical transformation rejection can offer us, the freedom to exist without the constant need for external approval. It's not a freedom we achieve by fighting rejection, but a freedom we find by diving so deeply into it that we discover something untouchable on the other side. But there's something even deeper happening when we cross this threshold. Something our materialistic culture rarely acknowledges. Sometimes rejection is divine protection in disguise. Sometimes not being chosen is the universe sparing us from wasting our precious energy in places where our light would never truly be seen. There's a level of spiritual maturity our culture rarely discusses, the ability to receive a no with gratitude, not the false gratitude we force to appear evolved, but a genuine gratitude born from the recognition that not every connection is a gift. Clarice captured this wisdom when she wrote, "Maybe I shouldn't have met certain people," as if recognizing that some missed encounters are more sacred than successful encounters, that some closed doors protect us from paths that seemed promising but would lead us far from our truth. How do we distinguish between protective rejection and destructive rejection? Protective rejection, even though it hurts, leaves our essence intact. We may feel pain, but we don't feel diminished as people. It's as if a wiser part of us recognizes, this wasn't for me. Destructive rejection, on the other hand, makes us question our fundamental worth. It leaves us feeling as if there's something intrinsically wrong with us. The difference is not necessarily in how we are rejected, but in our internal ability to distinguish between what is about us and what is about the natural incompatibility between two energies. Let me share a practice that transformed my relationship with past rejections. I call it gratitude for the doors that closed. For a week, every night before bed, recall a situation where you were rejected. It could be a job you didn't get, a relationship that didn't work out, a friendship that fell apart. Now, instead of reliving the pain, ask yourself this question: how would my life have been different if that door had opened? Often, you'll find that many of the rejections that hurt the most were redirections that led you to something much better. When we're rejected, our first instinct is to quickly seek a new source of validation. As if loneliness were a toxic state we need to escape as quickly as possible. But what if loneliness were actually the laboratory where our authenticity is forged? Neuroplasticity shows us that our brain constantly rebuilds itself based on where we focus our attention. When rejection forces us to turn our attention inward, we create new neural networks of self-awareness. It's as if our mind finally has space to know itself without the constant interference of the need to please others. There's a fundamental difference between empty solitude and fertile solitude. Empty solitude is when we're alone, but our mind remains obsessed with others, what they think of us, why they rejected us, how to regain their approval. Fertile solitude is when we're alone and finally able to hear our own inner voice. Clarice Lispector was a master of this distinction. "I speak to myself, and that is enough for me," she wrote. It wasn't pathological isolation. It was the discovery of the richness of her own company. It was the recognition that there was a person inside her worth knowing deeply. How do you recognize when your loneliness is becoming medicine instead of poison? Some signs: You start making decisions based on what you genuinely want, not what you think will please others. You feel less anxious about external approval because you've developed an internal validation system. You discover interests and passions you didn't know you had because you finally have the mental space to explore them. Here we arrive at the most radical transformation of all, when we stop asking, "Why do they reject me?" and start asking, "Who do I really want to be with?" It's a fundamental shift in vibrational frequency. We move from the energy of lack to the energy of conscious choice. Quantum physics shows us that we are simultaneously observers and creators of our reality. When we change our internal observation of rejection, we change our external creation of relationships. It's as if we've tuned into a different channel on the cosmic radio. The transformation of vibrational frequency occurs in 3 stages. First, we stop fearing rejection. This doesn't mean it no longer hurts, but it means we no longer see it as a verdict on our worth. Second, we begin to use rejection as information. It shows us where there is no real compatibility. Third, we develop our own capacity to reject. We consciously choose where to invest our emotional energy. This third stage is crucial and often overlooked. People with a history of rejection often develop an indiscriminate acceptance. They are so grateful for any scrap of attention that they fail to exercise their own discernment. Learning to say no becomes as transformative as learning to receive no. The neuroplasticity of self-esteem works like a muscle. The more we practice self-validation, the stronger it becomes. The more we recognize our own worth regardless of external opinion, the more this recognition becomes our predominant neurological reality. There's a powerful ritual to energetically close old rejection patterns. For 7 consecutive nights, write a letter to each person who significantly rejected you. Not to send it, but to release it. Thank them for the lessons learned, forgive the wounds, and declare your freedom from that energetic pattern. Finally, burn all the letters, visualizing that you are releasing not only the hurt, but also the identity of the rejected person. Let's recap the most important lessons from this journey, because intellectual understanding is different from emotional integration. And integration is what transforms knowledge into lived wisdom. First lesson: rejection isn't a judgment on our essence, but often on the incompatibility between our authenticity and the other person's expectations. When Clarice said, "Being rejected is almost an encounter," she was pointing to this truth. Rejection forces us into an intimate encounter with ourselves that we might not have had otherwise. Second lesson: our body chemistry changes dramatically when we're rejected, creating an altered state of consciousness where our perception of reality is temporarily distorted. Knowing this empowers us to avoid making important decisions or forming definitive conclusions about ourselves when we're in this chemical state. Third lesson: we often attract rejections that reflect aspects we reject in ourselves. This doesn't mean we deserve rejection, but rather that there is a law of resonance at work where our internal wounds magnetize similar external experiences. Fourth lesson: there is a crucial difference between protective rejection and destructive rejection. The former redirects us, the latter diminishes us. Developing discernment to distinguish between them is a fundamental spiritual skill. Fifth lesson: the solitude forced by rejection can become a laboratory for self-knowledge, where we discover internal resources we never knew existed. Now, let me contrast 2 possible trajectories. Imagine 2 people who have experienced similar rejections. The first person interprets each rejection as confirmation of their inadequacy. They develop increasingly sophisticated strategies to avoid future rejection. They become overly complacent, suppress their authenticity, and live in a constant state of approval anxiety. This person may even manage to avoid some rejections, but at the cost of never being truly known or loved for who they truly are. The second person uses each rejection as an opportunity for refinement. They ask themselves, what does this teach me about myself? What aspects of myself am I rejecting? How can I use this experience to become more authentic? This person may experience more rejections initially, but gradually attracts much deeper and more meaningful connections. The difference between these two trajectories isn't the number of rejections received, but how each person interprets these experiences. One sees rejection as a verdict, the other sees it as information. There's a Taoist parable that illustrates this perfectly. A farmer loses his horse, and his neighbors say, "What a tragedy!" He replies, "Perhaps." The horse returns bringing wild horses, and the neighbors say, "How fortunate!" He replies, "Perhaps." His son is injured breaking the horses, and the neighbors say, "How unlucky!" He replies, "Perhaps." War comes, and his son cannot go to fight because he's injured, and the neighbors say, "What a blessing!" He replies, "Perhaps." The wisdom of this story is that our interpretation of events is more powerful than the events themselves. Rejection itself is neutral. It is our relationship to it that determines whether it will be a destructive or transformative force in our lives. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming who we truly are. He believed this process was only possible through encountering our shadow, those aspects of ourselves we prefer to keep hidden. Rejection forces this encounter. When our persona is rejected, our shadow is allowed to emerge. And herein lies the deepest irony. Often our shadow contains not only our negative aspects, but also our most unique gifts. The very things that make us different, special, authentic, but that we've learned to hide in order to be accepted. How many people live their entire lives without ever discovering their true talents because they're too busy trying to develop talents they believe are more acceptable? How many never express their genuine sensitivity because they fear being seen as weak? How many suppress their emotional intensity because they've been taught that it makes them difficult? Rejection, paradoxically, can be the path back to these rejected aspects of ourselves. It can be the gateway to an authenticity we never knew was available. But this requires courage. The courage to remain open even after being hurt. The courage to continue expressing yourself authentically even after being misunderstood. The courage to keep your heart soft in a world that often values toughness. Now we get to the heart of everything we've explored today. Remember the question I asked at the beginning? Why does our brain process rejection as physical pain? Why does a word, a gesture of exclusion, activate the same neural areas as a wound on the body? The answer isn't just evolutionary. It's not just because on the African savanna, being rejected by the group meant death. There's something more sacred going on. Our soul recognizes rejection as pain because it is literally a separation from the illusion that our worth depends on external opinion, a separation from the fantasy that we can please everyone, a separation from the belief that we need to be different from who we are to be worthy of love. This pain is the soul's alarm telling us, you are moving away from your truth. Not because we've done anything wrong, but because we're trying to mold our essence to fit into spaces that weren't meant for us. Clarice Lispector discovered this in the most visceral way possible. I accept life, and I accept being rejected by life. She wrote, it wasn't passive resignation, it was active surrender. It was the recognition that her humanity encompassed both love and rejection, both belonging and loneliness. And in that surrender, something miraculous happened. She stopped trying to be accepted and started being real. She stopped writing to please critics and started writing to touch souls. She stopped living for external approval and started living from her inner truth. Jung called this process individuation, the process of becoming a unique, indivisible individual. He believed that becoming who we truly are is only possible when we stop trying to be who others want us to be. But individuation requires us to traverse the valley of rejection, because only when our persona is denied does our essence have room to flourish. Only when the external applause ceases can we hear the internal ovation of the soul that has finally recognized its own music. There are people who never make this transition. They spend their entire lives changing themselves to avoid rejection, without realizing they are rejecting themselves in the process. They die without ever knowing who they truly were beneath all the masks they wore to be accepted. The secret that only the rejected know is this: on the other side of the deepest pain lies the most radical freedom. The freedom to exist without needing permission. The freedom to love without expecting reciprocity. The freedom to create without fear of judgment. When we finally stop fighting our imperfect humanity and start embracing it, something extraordinary happens. We stop attracting people who need to change us and start attracting people who see us. We stop seeking connections based on superficial compatibility and start finding souls who recognize our unique light. Clarice Lispector left us one final truth about rejection that goes beyond any technique, beyond any healing process. The freedom to be imperfectly ourselves is the last stage of transformation. It's not the freedom to be perfect. It's not the freedom to never be rejected again. It's the freedom to be fully human, with our contradictions, our vulnerability, our infinite capacity to love and to suffer. There is an invisible community of people who have made peace with their rejected humanity. They recognize themselves not by the successes they've achieved or the approval they receive, but by the presence they carry. A presence that says, "I exist, and that's enough." These people no longer fear loneliness because they've discovered they've never truly been alone. They carry within them a constant companion, their own soul finally reconciled with itself. They no longer avoid situations where they might be rejected because they understand that their essence is untouchable. They can be denied, ignored, misunderstood, but they cannot be diminished. And here's the ultimate paradox. When we stop fearing rejection, it loses its power over us. Not because we'll never be rejected again, but because rejection can no longer disconnect us from our fundamental truth. Most people will never reach that place. They will continue to live in fear of no, constantly changing themselves to avoid the pain of exclusion. They will die without knowing that there was a version of themselves who didn't need external approval because they had found eternal approval within. But you don't have to be the majority. You can choose to make the transition. You can choose to see your next rejection not as a verdict, but as an invitation. An invitation to dive deeper into who you truly are when you're not trying to be accepted by anyone. Your soul has been waiting for this encounter for a long time. It's been waiting for the moment when you will finally say, "I accept myself completely, and that is enough for me," not as a forced statement, but as an acknowledgement of a truth that has always been there. The path back home to your authentic self may pass through the valley of rejection, but on the other side of that valley is you, the real, untouched you, free to love without fear and exist without permission. If you feel something inside you recognize this truth, if something in your soul sighs with relief upon hearing these words, then you are ready to begin. Not a process of healing, but a process of remembering. Remembering who you were before the world taught you that you needed to be different to be loved. And if you want to continue this journey with us, subscribe to the channel. Because this is just the first glimpse of the real you can have. There's so much more waiting for you on the other side of your courage to be authentically imperfect. Comment, "I choose myself," if you're ready to make peace with your full humanity. Your soul has been waiting for this declaration of independence for a long time. Until our next meeting with the real that lives within you.